ever wonder, how can the people that are constantly posting about completing DIY projects afford all these projects? This costs so much money. How are they possibly budgeting for that? Or do they just have like all the money in the world and money just doesn't matter? I thought that it would be helpful for me to share with you, how do I budget for my DIY projects? And how do I determine which projects I'm going to prioritize in each year based off of that budget? So if you feel like that's something helpful for you, so that if you are interested in doing DIY projects, you're able to budget better, then I hope that you continue to watch this video. My name is Rachel. This is Lux on the Low, where we talk all things about having a luxurious life, whether that be in our home or in our wardrobe, while sticking to a realistic budget. So if that's something that makes sense for you, then I really hope that you subscribe, as that is something that costs you absolutely nothing, so you're staying within the budget, but it means the world to me. How do I budget for these DIY projects? The first thing that I do is I determine for the year, how much am I willing to spend on upgrading things in my home. So I have basically a bucket of, this is how much money I'm going to dedicate to DIYing this year. Okay. Then I break it down into, what are the areas in my home I'm really wanting to prioritize this year. So for me this year, I'm wanting to prioritize updating or completely actually renovating my mudroom and my laundry room. So knowing that those are the priority areas for me, then I think about, okay, knowing that this is the full amount that I have for the entire year, how am I going to break that up to the things that I really want to prioritize? And, that depends on how big the space is. So the mudroom is a smaller space versus the laundry room is a bigger space. So more percentage of the budget is going to go for the laundry room compared to the mudroom. Once you have an idea of, okay, this is how much I'm going to allot to each project that I'm going to complete this year, the next is, what does it look like completing that project? What items are you going to need to buy? And then what items do you already have that you can utilize? And then lastly, what tools do you need? And I think that this is a hidden cost that we don't typically talk about when it comes to DIY projects. You see these projects done and you're like, whoa, that was amazing. I can't believe that you did that all by yourself. But they don't talk about how they had to have, a saw. They had to have a nail gun. These things are actually quite expensive. And yes, some of these things you can obviously rent out from different places like Lowe's, Home Depot, and things like that. Some of these things you can't. There is no way to rent them. And so there is an upfront cost that you have to think about with regard to, what are the logistics of actually doing this DIY project, and do you have the tools to do it? And if you don't, is the tool cost, you have to include that in your budget, right? So for example, things that you are always almost going to have to buy, especially if you are, painting, mudding, things like that. Well, painting, you're going to need paint rollers, you're going to need a paintbrush if you don't already have it, things to sand areas so that you can get a good finish. And these things are additional costs you have to budget for within your DIY project, not to go over budget. Make sure you're thinking about the tools piece of things. So I really try to sit down and plan for, okay, these are the things that I am planning on adding to the space that I'm going to have to physically buy or put together. How much is that going to cost? And then what tools do I need, and do I have all those tools to do it? The next thing is thinking about, how do you want to adjust the space so that it looks the way that you want it to look. So that's, paint colors. Do you want to do an accent wall? What does that look like? What I typically do to save money in this area is I use paint colors that I have already used within my home that I really enjoy. And then I will, you can add accent by doing some wallpaper, but you have to be mindful of how much wallpaper costs, because it is very expensive, especially if it's a large area. Or can I use paneling that I've already used in one area and I have some left over? So what do you already have within your home from last projects that you completed that you can utilize again to save yourself money and some of that cost that comes with updating spaces? lastly, I want you to also think about time. I think that this, again, is something that we don't necessarily think about or talk about with regard to a project, but your time is money. You are, dedicating time to this. And so how much time is this going to cost you? And could you have utilized that time doing other things that mean a lot to you? And that, I think, can kind of help as well with thinking about which projects do you want to prioritize and what does that look like. So when it comes to budgeting, things that I do is I make sure I have an idea of these are the areas I'm going to prioritize this year. This is the amount of money I'm willing to dedicate this year, and I actually sit down and plan, okay, I think that around this is how much it's going to cost me. Then the other thing that I do is I actually keep an idea of how much did it actually cost, so that I can, not saying that I don't go over budget, because there are things that, okay, you anticipate, the type of faucet that I'm wanting, it's only going to cost, $50, $100, say $100, but then the one you really want ends up costing $150. Okay, well, are you willing to get something different, or are you wanting to splurge for that item now? Okay, now you're getting away from your budget. So what I do is I keep a Excel spreadsheet of how much I'm actually spending, right? And I match that to how much I plan to spend. That way you have a better idea of, okay, well, if I splurge in this area, then I need to adjust in this area if I'm really planning on staying on budget. And if you're okay with having a little wiggle room of where you're not completely on budget, then you have to determine what that is and what you're okay with. The last thing of what do I not do when it comes to DIY projects and figuring out budgets. I don't just do whatever I want, if that makes sense. So I don't just, I'm just going to do it however much it is, that's what it is, and, then I have no idea how much money it costs. When you do it that way, you don't actually know how much money you've saved with regard to doing that versus paying someone to do it. Although likely you did save more than what it would cost for you to pay someone, but you also have to factor in the last cost that I've not talked about yet. And that last cost is redoing things because you didn't know what you were doing. If you have not had to do that, then maybe you are way better at doing DIY than I am. But I have managed to flood my basement twice. And if you have not heard that story time, then I'll link that video up above so that you can go and watch that. But there are definitely major mistakes that we have made with regard to doing DIY projects that have cost us time and money that we had to go back and redo and fix. And so you have to budget that into that. You likely are not an expert in this area. And if you are not an expert in this area, then there are going to be some growing pains. Another example of a DIY project that I did that ended up costing us a lot of money is when we remodeled the bathroom in our other home. We completely remodeled it, gutted out everything, completely remodeled it. We put this very gorgeous tile on the bottom, and this tile was very expensive. And I opted for this tile because I really liked the look of this tile. And all of it ended up washing off. And so that was a waste of money. I could have saved money by getting a different tile that I would still have looked good and now would have looked better than what it looks like now. Saved money by doing that and then not having all the additional added things that we had to do to clean that tile off to make it not look completely hideous so that we didn't have to pull all that tile out. So what I'm saying is there are things that are going to come up that you think you know what you're doing, you think you have it down, you did it so well, and then all of a sudden, haha, here you go, here's this thing you never expected, and now you have to account for that cost. So what does that look like for you? And that's something to be very mindful of when you're doing DIY projects. So I hope that this was helpful. If you're wanting to hear more about how there are hidden costs with regard to DIY projects so that you have a better idea of how to budget for those things, then watch for that video. It will be coming up here in the next couple weeks. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. I hope you have a luxurious day. But remember to keep it on the low. Bye, guys.